Black bears have started hunting people in Tennessee, and no one can explain why. Late on a Saturday night near downtown Gatlinburg, a man renting a cabin for the weekend walked into his kitchen to get a glass of water. He was not in the backcountry. He was not on a trail. He was inside a locked rental cabin, a short walk from restaurants and gift shops, the kind of place families book specifically because it promises the mountains without the risk. Standing in his kitchen was a black bear. It charged him immediately. It swatted him across the face and the top of his head, then raked its claws down his back before he managed to break away and lock himself inside a bedroom. He called 911 from the floor of that room while the bear moved through the rest of the cabin. Investigators later found how it got in. The French doors leading outside had been locked, but not deadbolted. The bear had simply pushed through. When wildlife officers caught and euthanized the animal responsible, the details did not fit the story most visitors expect to hear. This was not an old, sick, desperate bear. It was a young female, 2 or 3 years old, a little over 200 pounds, with no cubs and no obvious reason to be that bold. She had walked up to an occupied building in a residential part of town, forced her way through a closed door, and gone inside anyway. In a town where thousands of people were asleep in identical cabins within a few hundred yards of hers. If you live anywhere near Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, or Sevier County, tell us your neighborhood in the comments, because what happened in that kitchen is becoming less rare than anyone in the tourism business wants to admit. Now, before we go further, let us be fair to the animal, because the baseline numbers are genuinely on its side. Tennessee is home to a large and growing black bear population, with wildlife officials estimating well over 40,000 bears statewide. The overwhelming majority of them will spend their entire lives without ever forcing their way into a building where a person is standing. Most encounters end exactly the way they are supposed to, with the bear bolting the second it realizes it has been seen. But hold on to that number, because what happened in that Gatlinburg kitchen was not an isolated fluke. Not long after, just outside the Gatlinburg city limits, a call came in describing a woman being bitten and dragged off her own porch by a bear. When officers responded, the details on the ground got complicated fast. The county sheriff would later say the woman had not actually been bitten, that she had been backing away from an aggressive bear, tripped, and fell. The wildlife agency could not fully confirm either version, and that disagreement between two official sources on the ground is itself part of the pattern here. What both sides agreed on was simpler and more unsettling. A bear had already broken into a vehicle at that same property days earlier, causing enough damage to total it, with groceries sitting inside. When officers arrived to investigate the porch incident, they found that same yearling caught in a trap set for it, along with an adult female and a second yearling nearby. All three were euthanized on the spot because of how habituated and food conditioned they had become. Look at the shape of that case for a second. This was not one bad night. It was a bear family that had already graduated from raiding a car to walking straight up onto an inhabited porch, with a person standing right there. There is a way wildlife officers learn to read the difference between a bear that is just curious and a bear that has crossed into something else. A bear passing through is loud, easily startled, and quick to break contact the moment a door opens or a voice calls out. A bear that has stopped being afraid moves differently. It doesn't flinch at the porch light, it doesn't bolt when it hears you inside. It keeps coming, testing the door, testing the window, treating a house the same way it would treat a fallen log full of grubs, as one more thing standing between it and whatever it has already decided is on the other side. Wildlife officers who deal with this corridor every summer say the tell is almost always the same. The bear that runs at the first bang of a pot lid is not the one that ends up in a kitchen. The one that pauses, looks, and keeps moving toward the sound is. And notice who these incidents keep finding. Not backcountry hikers who ignored the posted rules, a tourist asleep in a cabin they paid to feel safe in, a homeowner standing on her own porch a few steps from her own front door. These are people who did everything a visitor or a resident is supposed to do, in the exact kind of developed residential setting that bear safety pamphlets treat as the safe side of the equation. This is where the easy explanation runs out of road. If this were purely a story about bears trained on campground coolers, you would expect these incidents clustered around dumpsters and picnic tables in the park itself. Instead, both of these cases happened in town. One inside a locked building on a residential street, the other on a porch outside the city limits, following a car break-in on private property. Neither one needed a national park backdrop to happen. If your own town has had a bear incident that felt more like a break-in than a wildlife encounter, tell us about it in the comments below, because it is exactly the kind of case that belongs in a video like this one. So what is actually going on here? The first piece is development pressure stacked directly on top of bear habitat. Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge sit right against the boundary of the Great Smoky Mountains, and over the last few decades, that boundary has filled in with cabins, restaurants, and short-term rentals built deeper and deeper into what used to be uninterrupted forest. Tennessee's own bear population has climbed into the tens of thousands at the same time. This corridor has exploded with tourism infrastructure. The line between bear country and downtown has not just blurred here. In a lot of these neighborhoods, it barely exists anymore. A cabin built 10 years ago on the edge of the woods is now, from the bear's point of view, just another feature of the same forest it has always known. The second piece is the one that explains the specific shape of these incidents better than habitat pressure alone. Food conditioning in a tourist economy works differently than food conditioning in a quiet rural county. Every week, thousands of short-term rentals cycle through new guests who don't know the local rules, who leave coolers on porches, who forget that the French doors need a deadbolt and not just a lock. A bear working that corridor doesn't need to find one careless homeowner. It only needs to find a percentage of a constant, rotating supply of them, week after week, cabin after cabin. That is a completely different kind of pressure than a bear encountering one negligent camper a season. A rural bear might get lucky once or twice a year. A bear working the edge of Gatlinburg can find an unsecured cooler or an unlatched door most weekends of the summer from a completely different family every single time, none of whom know they are the latest lesson in a bear's ongoing education. But food conditioning by itself still does not fully explain a bear that pushes through a closed door into an occupied kitchen at night. A bear looking for an easy meal from an unlocked cooler is behaving rationally. A bear that forces entry into a building with a person standing inside it has crossed into something food conditioning alone doesn't fully cover, which is where the third piece comes in. And it is the one wildlife officers in this corridor are the most reluctant to say out loud. Bears that reach this level of habituation do not stay static, they escalate. The same yearling caught near that porch had already broken into a car days earlier. Wildlife biologists who study problem bears elsewhere in the country have documented the same pattern again and again. A bear that successfully raids a trash can graduates to raiding a cooler. A bear that successfully raids a cooler graduates to testing a screen door. A bear that successfully tests a screen door eventually tests a real one. Nationally, the animals most likely to complete that entire ladder, from opportunistic scavenger to bear that will force its way into an occupied structure, skew heavily toward young adult males and bold young females without cubs to slow them down. Exactly the profile of the bear in that Gatlinburg cabin. Once a bear has learned that a locked door is not actually an obstacle, there is no cooler or trash can rule left that reliably stops it. Every rung of that ladder gets a little quieter than the one before it, until the animal standing in your kitchen isn't announcing itself with noise or bluster at all. It's just there, the way it has learned a door eventually gives if you lean on it long enough. None of these three pieces closes the case entirely by itself. Development pressure tells you why bears and tourists are sharing the same square footage in the first place. The tourist food economy tells you why so many of these bears never fully develop a fear of buildings to begin with, and behavioral escalation tells you why a small number of them eventually stop testing coolers and start testing doors. Stack them together, and you still cannot predict, on any given night in any given rental cabin, which bear has already climbed that entire ladder and which one is still 3 steps behind it. You cannot look at a healthy, calm bear ambling along a fence line in broad daylight and know, just from that one glance, whether it belongs to the overwhelming majority that will never touch a door in its life or the rare one that already has. Wildlife officers in Sevier County know the pattern well enough to act fast when they see it, trapping and removing entire family groups the moment a bear crosses from property damage into direct contact. What they cannot tell you in advance is which specific bear, on which specific street, is about to make that jump. None of this means Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge are somehow unsafe to visit. The overwhelming majority of the bears living in and around that corridor will never touch a car, a cooler, or a door in their entire lives. Most encounters here still end exactly the way the safety pamphlets promise, with a startled animal disappearing back into the tree line before most people even get their phone out. That baseline has not changed, and thousands of families book cabins in this corridor every single week without incident. But the comfortable assumption that a locked door and a residential street automatically put you on the safe side of the bear equation was always a statement about the average case, not a guarantee written into every bear working that corridor. So the next time you are staying in a cabin outside Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge, run the same checklist wildlife officers use. Is there a bear investigating your trash cans from a distance, ears up, quick to bolt if you step outside? That is an animal still behaving the way the overwhelming majority of Tennessee's bears behave every single day. It is wary of you, and that is exactly what you want. But if you are hearing something testing a door that is locked but not deadbolted, something that does not scatter at the porch light, something that keeps coming back to the same window night after night, you are looking at a bear that has already climbed several rungs up a ladder most tourists never even know exists. There will be no growl to warn you first, and by the time you hear the door give, the decision was already made somewhere back down that ladder, one raided cooler and one broken car window at a time. Somewhere in the hills behind Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge tonight, a few bears are already several rungs up that ladder, moving between cabins the same way they'd move between fallen logs, testing what gives and what doesn't. And the truth no cabin rental listing is ever going to put in the amenities section is a simple one. Nobody can tell you in advance which door on which street is the one that won't hold. We only know that, every so often, one of them doesn't, and that the bear responsible almost never looks any different from the hundreds of others quietly working the same tree line that same week. If your state has a similar pattern hiding behind the tourist brochures, tell us where in the comments, because it is probably already on the list for our next video. And if you want to keep seeing which animals are quietly rewriting the rules in the places Americans actually vacation, hit subscribe, because the next one is already on its way.